The drone hovered above the canyon, its hum barely audible over the wind sweeping through the red rocks. Mike steadied the controller in his hands, squinting at the small screen. Between the gnarled trees and the jagged edge of the cliff, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He zoomed in. There, a lynx stood frozen on a narrow ledge, her paws shifting nervously near the brink. Behind her, the earth had collapsed. What used to be a slope down to the forest below was now a sheer drop. Mike adjusted the angle, flying the drone closer. The canyon opened beneath, a deep scar with a river cutting silver lines through the pines. The lynx twitched her tail, staring across the gap. She was trapped, completely cut off from the ridge where she must have come from. One wrong move, and she would tumble into the ravine. He checked the GPS coordinates and tried to steady the drone against the gusts. The cliffs here weren't supposed to be this unstable. 2 nights ago, heavy rain had soaked the sandstone. Now the sun was drying it unevenly, cracking its edges. Mike felt that quiet rush of panic that comes when instinct meets helplessness. He pressed the button on his radio. "Carla, you copy?" he said. The static answered first, then her voice. "Go ahead, Mike. You sound winded." "What's going on?" He swallowed. "There's a lynx stranded across the canyon. Looks like the trail gave out in the landslide. She's got no way out. I'm sending you the feed." There was a pause. Then Carla, the park ranger, came back, her tone sharp but calm. "I'm watching it now. Poor thing. The rescue team's out on another call near the river bridge. Closest backup's hours away. Don't get close, Mike. Just keep eyes on her." He looked at the small figure pacing in the dust. If he left her there overnight, she might not survive the next collapse. "I can't just watch her, Carla. The edge is crumbling. If that ledge goes, she's gone." "You can't reach her from your side," Carla said firmly. "There's a ravine in between. Wait till morning, we'll get ropes and a team." Mike hesitated. The drone feed showed the lynx stopping to sniff the air, then crouching low, her body trembling. The ground beneath her shifted slightly. Tiny rocks skittered into the canyon, disappearing into the wind. He could almost hear them falling. "I'll see if I can get a better angle from the west ridge," he muttered. "Maybe there's a way across higher up." Carla sighed. "Be smart, Mike. It's not worth your neck." He shut off the radio. The wind pushed at his jacket as he hiked back to the truck, the sun already dipping behind the mesas. He needed help, someone who knew the terrain better than he did. His mind jumped to one person, Ethan, his neighbor, the guy who still climbed these cliffs on weekends just for fun. He dialed. Ethan picked up on the second ring. Mike filled him in, the drone footage, the landslide, the lynx trapped on the opposite side. There was a pause, then Ethan said, "That's up near the old ridge trail, right? I remember a service path up top, left over from the fire crews. Maybe we can reach a parallel ledge if we move fast." "We?" Mike asked. "You're not going out there alone. I'll grab gear and meet you at the overlook in 40 minutes. The plan felt reckless, but it was the only one that made sense. Mike loaded his pack with what he had: rope, flashlight, spare drone batteries, a coil of paracord, and a few protein bars. The light was fading, painting the cliffs in gold and copper. When he returned to the overlook, Ethan's old Jeep was already there, its headlights cutting through the dust. Ethan stood beside it, strapping a climbing harness to his waist. "You sure about this?" Mike asked. "No," Ethan said, "but I'd rather try than think about that cat all night. Let's move before the wind picks up." They followed the ridge trail west, the path narrowing into uneven rock shelves. Mike kept glancing at the drone feed on his phone. The lynx was still there, pacing, restless. The gusts grew stronger, the sound of the canyon deepening into a low roar. At one point, they stopped to rest, and Mike turned to see the far side where she was trapped. The gap between the ledges seemed wider now in the dim light. He launched the drone once more, watching the image flicker as it fought the wind. The camera steadied just long enough to show the lynx crouched near the edge. She lifted her head, ears twitching toward the sound of the rotors. The next moment, the ground beneath her shifted again, a sliver of rock cracking away. Tiny pebbles rained into the canyon. Mike's stomach tightened. He pulled the drone back just in time to see the ledge shudder, another small collapse. He looked at Ethan. "We're running out of time." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then let's find that crossing before she loses her footing for good." The morning came with a faint orange glow spreading across the ridges. Mike had barely slept. The wind from last night had calmed, but the canyon still breathed that slow, uneasy silence after a storm. He checked his gear one more time. Ropes coiled neatly, helmets clipped to the packs, metal ladder sections strapped with cords. Ethan's Jeep door slammed behind him as he approached. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked, adjusting the straps on his harness. "As ready as I'll ever be," Mike replied, though his voice cracked slightly. The drone showed the same image that haunted him all night. The lynx crouched on her ledge, waiting. Every gust of wind could be her last. They started along the old service trail, one that Ethan remembered from a fire control map years ago. The path was barely visible now, swallowed by dry brush and loose stone. Each step sent pebbles skittering down the slope. Mike carried the drone controller slung to his chest, eyes flicking between the real canyon ahead and the screen. The air smelled of wet clay and juniper. Ethan paused at a bend and pointed to a faded red marker nailed to a dead tree. "Fire crew line," he said. "It's still holding." They followed the route for half an hour until the terrain broke into slabs of cracked sandstone. The ledge narrowed, forcing them to move sideways with one hand pressed against the wall. Below, the drop blurred into green and shadow. Every so often, Ethan drove a metal piton into the rock and clipped a carabiner, tying their ropes together loosely. Carla's voice crackled through the radio. "You two making progress?" "We are," Mike answered, breathing hard. "About 300 feet above the valley floor. We're parallel with her position, maybe 2 ridges away." "Good. Stay put if the slope looks unstable." The cat hasn't moved much. She's still pacing in a small area, but the ledge looks weaker this morning. "Copy that," Ethan said, tightening the strap on his pack. "We'll find a line across." As they rounded another outcrop, Mike caught a glimpse of the opposite wall through his binoculars. The lynx was there, a small patch of gold and gray against the rust-colored rock. She was lying down now, motionless except for the twitch of her tail. Relief mixed with fear. "Still alive," he whispered. The path dipped into a shallow ravine filled with broken branches and soft earth. A tree had uprooted itself long ago, leaving a hollow in the ground big enough to crawl through. They moved carefully, checking each foothold. Once, Ethan's boot slipped, and a piece of rock clattered into the canyon. The sound echoed for seconds before fading. "You good?" Mike called. "Yeah, just my pride," Ethan muttered, brushing off dust. "Let's keep moving." They stopped to rest on a flat shelf and unstrapped the lightweight aluminum ladders. Each section was about 6 feet long, originally from an old viewing platform that a volunteer named Harris had helped them borrow the night before. They had fastened them together with bolts and paracord, creating something that could stretch across a narrow gap if needed. Mike launched the drone again. The propellers hummed as the little machine rose, capturing a broad sweep of the canyon. From this height, the destruction of the landslide was clear. An entire section of the trail had peeled away, leaving nothing but hanging roots and a V-shaped chasm. He flew the drone slowly along the rim, measuring distance with the on-screen telemetry. "Found it," he said finally. "The narrowest break is east from us, maybe 60 yards. Looks just wide enough for the ladder bridge." They packed the drone and began the climb upward along the fractured ridge. The wind grew stronger the higher they went. Dust swirled in small spirals around their boots. Ethan went first, setting anchors when the rock looked suspicious. Mike followed, his legs burning from the constant tension. After another 20 minutes, they reached the point the drone had shown. It wasn't much, just 2 ledges facing each other with an empty space of about 8 feet between. The canyon yawned below, nothing but air and the faint whisper of water far beneath. Ethan crouched and tested the edge with his gloved hand. "Solid enough," he said, though his tone didn't sound convinced. "If we brace the ladder here and anchor it to that tree root, it might hold." Mike nodded. He unfolded the sections carefully, setting one end against the rock. The metal scraped against the sandstone. They adjusted the angle until the bridge aligned almost level. Ethan looped a safety line around a thick root that jutted from the wall, testing it with his weight. From across the canyon came a faint sound, a low cry, like a hoarse yowl carried by the wind. The lynx was awake again, watching them. Her head lifted slightly, eyes fixed on the movement. Carla's voice came through the radio once more. "I'm tracking your signal. Looks like you're close to her position." "We are," Mike said, breathing steadily. "But the drop's nasty. We'll need to secure this before anything else." "Just don't spook her," Carla warned. "If she bolts, she could slip." "Understood." They spent the next hour reinforcing the temporary crossing. Mike's hands were raw by the time they tightened the last knot. The sun had climbed high, heating the rock under their boots. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and looked out across the canyon. From this angle, the opposite wall seemed close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. Mike lifted the drone for another scan, guiding it over the bridge they had just built. The video feed flickered as the wind caught the small craft. For a moment it stabilized, showing the lynx curled in the same spot, ears flicking toward the buzzing sound. Then a sudden gust slammed through the canyon. The image lurched wildly. The drone spun once, twice, and tumbled out of frame. The signal went dark. Mike froze. "I lost her," he whispered. Ethan turned sharply. "Lost the feed?" "Yeah." The drone went down. "I don't know if she's still there." They both stared across the gap, silence pressing in between the gusts of wind. The canyon looked the same, but now it felt much wider, emptier, and far more dangerous than before. For a few long minutes, neither of them spoke. The canyon wind whistled through the ladder rungs like a quiet warning. Mike stared at the black screen on his controller, the last frame still frozen, a blur of rock, dust, and sky. Then slowly the signal flickered back to life. The drone's camera steadied, its propellers whining somewhere below them. Against all odds, it had landed on a narrow outcrop just 10 feet down. Ethan exhaled in relief. "You lucky bastard," he muttered. "Go get it, or do we leave it?" Mike shook his head. "Leave it. Not worth the risk. We can still use the feed." The camera tilted slightly, and there she was, the lynx, still alive, perched on the same ledge. Her tail lashed back and forth, ears pinned low. The rock under her paws looked darker now, damp from seeping groundwater. "She's running out of space," Mike said quietly. "That ledge won't hold much longer." Ethan nodded. "Then we do it now." They retrieved the ladder sections and laid them flat, connecting them with the bolts and paracord they had brought. The sun sat high above and heat shimmered along the rocks, but the air carried a faint metallic taste, the sign of an approaching storm. In the distance, thunder rolled faintly between the peaks. Mike crouched by the edge, measuring the gap once more. The space between the two ledges looked even wider now, the soft soil crumbling with each gust. They had to act before the rain came. He turned to Ethan. "We'll brace it here. Anchor to that juniper root and the big rock beside it. If the wind shifts, tighten the line." Ethan nodded and started looping the rope around the root. The wood creaked under tension, but held firm. Together, they lifted the assembled bridge, 2 sections of ladder with a flat plank fastened on top, salvaged from a viewing deck they had passed that morning. The contraption wasn't elegant, but it was sturdy enough for an animal's weight. "Careful," Mike whispered. "Don't let the metal scrape too loud." They eased the bridge forward until its far end rested against the opposite ledge. The clang of aluminum against sandstone echoed faintly, but didn't carry far. Mike's pulse drummed in his ears. He stepped back, watching the bridge settle into place. Carla's voice crackled faintly from the radio. "What's your status?" "We've got a line across," Mike said. "The lynx is still there. Looks like she's listening." "Be quiet," Carla warned. "Keep movements minimal. She's on edge." Mike turned the volume down and set up his camera on a tripod behind a boulder. The goal was simple, no shouting, no sudden motion. Let her choose the path. He switched the drone feed to static view and zoomed in slightly, capturing every twitch of the animal's whiskers. Ethan crouched near the start of the bridge, keeping his body low. He reached into his pack and pulled out a strip of dried venison, the only food they had that might work as bait. Without looking at Mike, he whispered, "I'll push it just far enough. If she wants it, she'll have to step forward." Mike gave a single nod. He retreated several steps, giving her space. The canyon was utterly still except for the sigh of the wind. Ethan extended his arm and placed the meat on the plank, about halfway across. The scent drifted through the air, faint but distinct. The lynx's ears flicked. She turned her head toward the smell, muscles tense beneath her coat. Her eyes darted between the bridge and the men. "Come on, girl," Ethan murmured under his breath. "You can do this." The lynx lowered herself, sniffing the air. Her paws shifted forward an inch, then another. The bridge wobbled slightly, a metallic creak echoing. Mike's breath caught. The animal froze, eyes locked on the strange path. Her tail lashed once, twice, then stopped. She took one cautious step onto the plank. A few grains of sand slid from beneath her paw, falling soundlessly into the ravine. She jerked her head, startled by the movement, and her claws dug into the wood. The bridge held. Mike's hands clenched at his sides. "That's it," he whispered, though no one could hear him. The lynx stood frozen for a full minute, every muscle quivering. Her ears swiveled toward the sound of distant thunder. Somewhere above, a dark cloud stretched over the canyon rim. A gust of wind brushed through the pines, carrying the first faint scent of rain. Ethan looked back at Mike. "If she moves fast, she'll make it." "Let's hope she knows that," Mike replied softly. The lynx inhaled once, a sharp, deliberate breath, and shifted her weight. Her hind legs pressed against the ledge, claws gripping the edge. Another gust of wind hissed through the rocks, rattling the ladder. Mike's heart pounded. He wanted to shout, to encourage, but silence was the only thing keeping her calm. The sky dimmed as clouds gathered overhead. A distant flash lit the horizon, followed by the low growl of thunder that echoed deep through the canyon. The first raindrops splattered onto the stone, darkening it in uneven circles. The lynx stayed perfectly still, a golden silhouette framed against the storm, poised between survival and the abyss. The rain started as a whisper, then grew into a steady drizzle that soaked through their jackets and darkened the rocks. Mike brushed water from his face and wiped the drone controller with his sleeve. The bridge trembled under each gust, the aluminum cold and slick to the touch. Across the gap, the lynx still stood on the ledge, body low, eyes fixed on the narrow path before her. "She's scared," Ethan murmured, crouching beside the anchor line. The root held firm, but the rope had begun to hum under tension. "Just give her time." They waited. Rain pattered softly on the metal rungs, each drop amplifying the sound of distance. The air smelled of wet soil and electricity. Thunder cracked somewhere behind them, deep and slow. The lynx twitched, stepped back 2 paces, then froze again. Mike kept his voice calm, steady. "You're okay, girl. You can make it." His tone wasn't meant for her ears as much as his own. Every second the storm worsened, the ledge eroded further. Small fragments of rock broke loose and tumbled into the canyon, swallowed by the wind. Ethan tightened the rope, checking the bridge's balance. It shifted slightly but held. The plank glistened, slick as glass. He jammed one of his trekking poles into a crack in the rock, using it as a stabilizer against the side of the bridge. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to stop a fatal wobble. The lynx crouched lower, muscles rippling under her wet fur. She looked once toward the opposite side, toward the sound of the men, toward safety, and then back at the void below. Her tail flicked once. Then, with no warning, she leapt. The moment stretched into silence. Her front paws hit the plank, claws scraping on metal. Her hind legs slipped, one paw dangling over the edge. For a fraction of a second, she hung there, suspended over emptiness, claws biting into the rung. Mike didn't move. "Don't shout. Don't startle her. Just breathe." Ethan dropped to one knee, pressing the trekking pole harder against the bridge to counter the sway. The bridge creaked, bending slightly under the animal's weight. The rope twanged. Water streamed down Ethan's arm. "Come on," he whispered, barely audible over the rain. The lynx scrambled, pulling herself up inch by inch. Her claws caught the crossbars, muscles trembling. Then, with one final push, she gained her footing. She paused, panting, eyes wide, drenched in rain. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The rain hissed around them, wind roaring through the canyon like applause. Then she bolted, fast, silent, powerful. In 3 long strides she crossed the rest of the bridge, her body a blur of motion. The metal clanged beneath her paws. She reached solid ground, sprang onto a boulder, and vanished into the junipers. Mike exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. He turned to Ethan, both men soaked to the bone, adrenaline still pounding. "You saw that?" "Every second," Ethan said, his grin breaking through exhaustion. "Let's pull it back before she changes her mind." They worked quickly, unhooking the ropes and dragging the ladder back to their side. The rain made every knot harder to untie, but they managed, hands numb and stiff. The aluminum scraped across the rock, leaving faint silver marks. Carla's voice burst through the static of the radio. "Guys, the storm's closing in fast. Lightning's moving your way. You need to pack up now." "Copy," Mike said, breathing heavily. She made it across. There was a pause, then a quiet exhale. "Good work. Get to higher ground and stay under cover." They collapsed the ladder sections and lashed them together. The wind was rising again, pushing sheets of rain sideways. Mike strapped the drone controller to his chest, though the signal was too weak for flight in this weather. As they started back toward the ridge, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the canyon in a blinding burst. For a brief second, the entire landscape glowed, wet stone, rushing water below, and the fresh footprints of the lynx leading into the trees. Then Mike noticed something else. Smaller prints, lighter, pressed beside hers in the mud. He crouched, heart skipping a beat. Ethan leaned over his shoulder. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Mike nodded slowly. "Cubs," he said. "She's not alone." The thunder rolled again, closer this time. Ethan adjusted his pack, urgency creeping into his voice. "Then we'd better make sure that bridge doesn't tempt anyone else." They hauled the ladder away from the edge, securing it under a rocky overhang. The rain pounded harder now, masking all other sounds except the faint rush of the river far below. Mike turned once more toward the opposite side. Through the curtain of rain, he thought he saw movement, a shadow slipping between trees, the lynx pausing to look back just once before disappearing into the forest. For a moment, despite the storm, the canyon felt calm. Then another flash of lightning split the sky, and the world went white. The storm raged through most of the night. Mike and Ethan had found shelter beneath a rock overhang, setting up the tent as best they could. The rain drummed against the nylon roof, echoing like distant footsteps. Inside, the air was cold and damp. They sat shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in their jackets, listening to thunder rolling across the canyon. Mike checked the drone battery again, though there was no signal strong enough to fly. He stared at the controller screen that showed nothing but static and thought about the lynx. She'd made it across, he'd seen her vanish into the trees, but the image of those small prints beside hers wouldn't leave his mind. "You think she really had cubs?" he asked quietly. Ethan leaned back, eyes half closed. "Looked like it. Probably hid them before the storm hit." He smiled faintly. "She's smarter than we are." They both laughed softly, the sound almost drowned out by rain. Fatigue set in soon after, and the rhythmic patter outside lulled them into restless sleep. By dawn, the storm had passed. Mist clung to the canyon walls like thin smoke. The ground glittered with dew, and the air smelled clean, washed of dust. Mike crawled out of the tent, stretching his stiff limbs. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting streaks of gold across the sky. He powered up the drone, the rotors spinning with a faint whine. The machine lifted smoothly into the quiet air, rising above the ridge. The canyon opened below, transformed by the night's rain. Small streams ran where cracks had been, and patches of fog drifted between the pines. Then he saw her. The lynx stood on the very rock ledge that had trapped her the day before, her coat glistening in the morning light. She wasn't pacing anymore. She stood tall and still, gazing out over the canyon as if surveying her reclaimed territory. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned and walked toward the forest. Mike zoomed in. Alongside her fresh prints, smaller ones trailed, unmistakably cubs, following close but unseen through the brush. His chest tightened, a strange mix of awe and relief. He lowered the drone slightly, keeping a respectful distance. The footage was steady, silent. No narration, no dramatics, just the rhythm of her movement, the curve of her back against the rising sun. Ethan emerged from the tent behind him, steaming cup of instant coffee in hand. "You got eyes on her?" "Yeah," Mike said softly. "She made it. And she wasn't alone." Ethan smiled, following the drone's screen. "Good. Then I'd say it was worth every step." They spent the next few hours packing up their gear. The ladder sections were heavy, the ropes slick with mud, but both men worked methodically. When they reached the ledge where the bridge had been anchored, the storm had washed most of the surface clean. They pulled the last of the cords free and coiled them neatly. "Let's mark this," Ethan said, pulling out a roll of bright orange tape. "Wouldn't want anyone thinking this is a real trail." Mike nodded. Together they stretched the tape across the rocks, tying it to a bent juniper branch. He added a small hand-painted sign from his pack, "Unsafe edge, do not cross." By the time they finished, the sun was high, and the sound of the river below had softened into a distant murmur. Mike took one last look across the canyon. The place where the lynx had been trapped now seemed impossibly fragile, a thin sliver of earth clinging to the cliff. If they'd waited another day, it would have been gone completely. They hiked back to the truck in silence, boots squelching in the damp soil. The sky above was clear, the kind of blue that comes only after a storm. When they reached the overlook, Mike turned one last time toward the forest on the opposite ridge. He launched the drone again, just for a final sweep. The camera panned slowly over the tree line, searching. For a moment, there was nothing but the endless green of pines. Then movement caught his eye, a flicker of motion among the shadows. The lynx emerged from a thicket, her fur bright against the dark trunks. Behind her, a smaller shape followed, clumsy but determined. A cub, maybe 3 months old, bounding to keep up. They walked together along a narrow trail, their bodies brushing the ferns as they passed. Mike didn't speak. He simply watched, recording in silence as the two figures grew smaller, swallowed by the forest. The drone hovered there for a moment longer, then he guided it gently back. Back at the truck, he saved the footage, labeling it with a simple name, Return. A week later, Mike came back alone. The air was drier now, the canyon sun-bleached and still. He hiked to the same ridge, checking the ledge across the gap. The rains had eaten more of it away. Nearly a full yard of earth was gone. The path the lynx had once stood on no longer existed. He launched the drone one last time. It soared high, tracing the familiar route toward the forest. Within minutes, the camera caught her again. The same lynx, walking along a clearing bathed in light, her cub trotting close beside her. Mike smiled, watching in silence. He didn't follow. He didn't zoom in. He just let the drone hover, capturing the simple truth of what he saw. Life moving forward, as it always does. Then he turned off the controller, packed his gear, and let the wind carry the sound of the forest back across the canyon.